There we go. Um, Hello, our next guest is coming to us virtually. She's had a bit of problems with the internet, but we're going to be able to hear her. You may not be able to see her. But is she, I think we do have a connection with her already. So yes, here we have a photograph. So let me introduce, we're going to be speaking with Anita Bhatia. She is the Assistant Secretary General and the Deputy Executive Director for Resources and Management at UN Women. She's also a board member of the Sanitation and Hygiene Fund. And we are going to be talking about investment. And I'll start it off with a conversation, but first just wanted to welcome Anita to our conference. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for coming. So let me start off. It's not been a great era for investment over the last couple of years. We've had the pandemic, the ensuing financial crisis. It's stalled and reversed progress on a lot of the SDGs, particularly on water, sanitation, hygiene issues. We're seeing a number of sort of economic crises, even in wealthy donor capitals. In the United States, we're seeing banking crises. We're seeing sort of problems in the tech sector. And all of this, has a big impact on sort of the donor economies. And so, and also indirectly on contributions, investments, and a lot of the issues that you're focusing on. So why don't you give us a sense of the state of play right now, and how you see sort of the investment environment, and whether you are in complete despair over the prospects of meeting the SDGs, or whether you see any areas where you see reason for some limited optimism.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, because I do think, as was being said in the panel that just concluded, that financing is one of the major constraints to getting us on track for the SDGs. Look, if you look at what has happened post-pandemic, the pandemic took an enormous toll on governments because they had to pivot very quickly to meet the demands of their populations with respect to emergency health services. And because this was such an unprecedented crisis, it did have an impact on the fiscal space that governments have to attend to other SDG needs. And so if you look just at the issue that we work on at UN Women day in, day out, which is the state of gender equality and women's empowerment, and I'll use that just as an example, but it's illustrative, the amount of investment in gender equality from public finance has actually been going down. And if you look at donor governments and you look at the latest OECD DAC report, you will see that after some years of increase about 10 years ago, spending on gender equality, whether through multilateral or bilateral channels of aid, is actually plateauing. And so this makes it very, very important for aid money to be used catalytically, including for the WASH sector, because governments no longer have the fiscal space and the GDPs that would allow the kinds of investments that are needed to get SDGs back on track. So for years, we have been talking, actually since Addis Ababa, about financing for development and how golden grant money must be used differently, and it must be used to catalyze and to unlock the money that is sitting in pension funds with institutional investors, with asset managers. So the question really that we must ask ourselves at this point is, how good have we been at doing that? And what are the successful models of using grant money catalytically to unlock private investment? And the answer, I'm afraid, is that the unlocking of private investment has simply not taken place at scale. So yes, you see private companies doing a lot more about particular SDGs, depending upon their corporate focus and their areas of priority. But the large-scale unlocking of investment capital, of institutional investor money, and getting that to flow towards SDG implementation has not happened yet. So I think I would say, I'm not in complete despair, but I do think we need a lot more work to be done on the ground to prepare projects and to prepare environments and enabling environments that actually allow grant money to unlock the private money sitting in the kinds of bodies that I described.
Right. I mean, perhaps we can talk about sort of a concrete example of how this plays out in the real world. And you've had a really interesting sort of example that you've mentioned before, and that is on the issue of menstrual hygiene. And you cited Scotland as the only country in the world that that has a policy of providing universal access to products in that area. And give me some sense of whether this is an issue where it's difficult to find investment and financing, and also, why is only one country doing this, and what are you working on to sort of change that?
Great question, and I think the answer is, I'd want to separate the issues of, say, menstrual hygiene from others in the wash sector, because menstrual hygiene actually still carries in many parts of the world social stigma. And there are taboos around this. And it's awkward to talk about this, particularly for male politicians and male ministers. This is not something men are very comfortable talking about. And frankly, women are not very comfortable talking about it either. But when you look at who holds decision-making power in many societies and many economies, it is men. And this is a subject that is covered with stigma and taboo. So the first thing we have to do is to get rid of those taboos and the shame that's associated with this very normal human activity. And that is something UN Women works on, which is to address social norms and to change stereotypes and social norms around many different things that impact gender equality, including menstrual hygiene. So that's one piece of work. But the second piece of work is really about making sure that people understand that there is an investment opportunity in menstrual hygiene, because there are many different parts of that cycle where there are markets waiting to be created and where investment is needed. Now, of course, there has been investment in basic menstrual hygiene products, but governments are still, in many parts of the world, treating these products as luxury products with differentiated tax regimes, and asking basically women and girls to pay a period tax. So we are lobbying to remove this kind of discrimination and pricing in many markets, and I'm happy to say that many markets, including Kenya, India, and others, but the list is still, have eliminated differential pricing on these products. But the list is small of countries that have done that. And so we still have our work cut out for us in making sure that governments are not discriminating against these kinds of products when they don't discriminate against products that are, used by men, for instance. And so I think there is a piece of work to be done there. And then finally, I would say that, when you look at other aspects of menstrual hygiene, which include the impacts that they have on girls and women, whether it is creating safe toilet facilities, whether it is ensuring that products are available not just at a price point that is affordable by most girls and women in developing countries, but also is available at the time that they need it, because very often for rural girls, this is a question of access, because there is no infrastructure and there is no store where they can get it. Last point I would make is that there's a great need for dissemination of what works and lessons to be shared from one country context to another. So in India, for instance, there is technology where sanitary napkins can be made for girls for, a ridiculously low price. That technology has not yet caught on worldwide, and it needs to. So, and I'm sure there are other examples of innovations that we need to take from one part of the world to another. So obviously a very big role for us here as well as a disseminator of knowledge.
Great. I wanted to ask you something about the conference and what sort of hopes and expectations you have to come out of it. I mean, one of the things that strikes me is that most of the representatives the government representatives are technical ministers, not heads of state. If you go to the COP, I mean, those are generally draw, quite a number of heads of states reflecting the priority of the meeting. Does that give you a sense that there still isn't the same level of high-level kind of priority attached to these issues? And sort of what concretely are you expecting to come out of this event?
I think. Look, first of all, I think it's great that this conference is happening. There hasn't been a UN water conference for almost 50 years, so it is fantastic that this is taking place, and the fact that most participants are technical, and not head of state level, I would not necessarily attribute to that a reading that this isn't something that is not front of mind for heads of state. I think water has become such a critical issue, and the wash sector associated with it is now increasingly recognized as an SDG that needs to be solved for its own right, but also because of the implications it has for the implementation of other SDGs. So, I'm not worried about the level of representation of the conference. At the conference, I think I do have high expectations in terms of concrete outcomes that will be agreed, because I think it is long overdue that water and the wash sector get the necessary attention. And frankly, that hasn't happened. But I think, in terms of concrete outcomes, we must get agreements on, common ways to approach the problem. Second, I think it's really important that what comes out of the conference is not just a sense of urgency in needing to deal with these issues, but also implementable action plans that people agree to take forward. And finally, there must be money that backs this, because without financing and without agreements on where this financing is going to come from, we will still be talking about these issues 10 years down the road without having adequately addressed them.
Yeah, a couple of the governments who spoke this week, Malawi and Kenya in particular, well, particularly Malawi, it just sort of has endured a kind of massive tropical cyclone storm, Freddie, in the last couple of weeks. And even before that, they were facing, severe problems in meeting their targets on access to water and sanitation. And this episode is going to cost them $75 million to repair the basic infrastructure. Kenya is talking about the need to double its annual investment in water and sanitation from 600 million to 1.3 billion. I mean, I think that, in the UN Development Report, they talked about the need to step up from 600 billion to $1 trillion a year to kind of meet the targets in the SDG. Are we just not going to meet those? I mean, I guess nobody wants to say that, but are these numbers that are really achievable, or are we really just going to be coming back to this in a few years and basically throwing in the towel and saying we need to sort of set up a whole new series of targets?
I mean, look, there have got to be some very fundamental things that change in the international financial architecture and the way we're approaching financing for the SDGs. Because if those fundamentals don't take place, those fundamental changes don't take place, yes, we will be having these same conversations. So a whole lot of things have to change. There is, an ongoing conversation, as you know, about reform of the international financial architecture, including the need to expand the balance sheet of the major multilateral development banks so that they can actually lend more, take more risks, and get more money into the countries where this is needed. There is a need to look at how SDRs are deployed, change that. There is a need for more financing of the UN development system. And frankly, there is a need for a lot of donor countries to come through with the promises that have been made in the past on some of these issues, and donor countries, because of changes in political leadership, have simply not done that. And so, I do think that depending on just the donor countries to fulfill their pledges on this isn't going to cut it. And that is why I think there is a need for really urgent implementation around the financing for development agenda, because the only way we're going to be able to meet the huge demands and the needs that this sector, but not this sector, but just all SDG implementation represents, is to unlock private capital. And I don't think we have enough success stories of that yet. And therefore, urgent need to work on removing the constraints to that in order to get more financing to these to the SDGs.
Thanks. I think our time is just about up, but I just wanted to ask you one last question. I gather there have been some leadership changes at UN Women, and we had a report in our publication recently that you may be stepping down. And I just was curious if you have any thoughts on what you're going to be doing next that you wanted to share with us, as you kind of move on, if the report that we had was true, which I presume it is. But
it is true. I will be leaving UN Women at the end of April, and it's a closely guarded state secret as to what I'm going to be doing next. No, I'm just kidding. No, look, I am just really excited about this next phase. It will be different from my current phase, what I'm doing now. And I will be in a position to share more about what this exciting new phase looks like later.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Anita, for being with us. And thanks for doing the show.